Welcome to the Think Fitness Life podcast, where we bring the mind, body, and gym together so you can improve your health, increase performance, and live your best life. For more information, visit thinkfitnesslife.com. Here are your hosts, Matt Gluckman and Eric Menchie.
So, welcome back to the Think Fitness Life podcast, Mindset, Exercise, and Nutrition. Today we have a very special guest with us who is going to help you overcome your binge eating problems, overcome any struggles with weight loss. This will be a great episode for people who are on those yo-yo diets or can't seem to get to their goal weight or can't seem to get that troubling fat to get off and stay off. And a lot of this does come down to the psychology of the way we operate and the way that we look at food and the addictive behaviors and cravings that can be associated with them. So without any further ado, Dr. Glenn Livingston.
Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for setting aside time to talk to us about the work you've done. So
I've been looking forward to it all week.
Excellent. So I'm really interested in talking more about these the 40,000 participants that you were studying. Yeah.
That was back in the days when internet clicks were cheap. Okay. And I could get people for a couple of pennies to come to my website. So over the course of about 5 years, I intercepted people when they were searching for stress management tools and techniques, anything to do with stress. And I asked them what they were stressed about. And I asked them what foods they had trouble controlling themselves with when they did feel stress. And I found 3 things, none of which wound up influencing the solution I found for my own eating and my several thousand clients. But it was very interesting anyway. I discovered that people that struggled with chocolate, like me, I always joke that I lost a war with the chocolate bar in 1982 and I woke up 20 years later.
It's my Achilles heel too.
Is it? Okay, so we got
I blame my mom. I say it just because she had chocolate when I was in the womb, so it's really her fault.
I mean, I've actually got a story I'll tell you in a minute about my mom and chocolate Bosco syrup, which is where everything started, I think, but it doesn't.
It sounds like it was where it started.
It doesn't really matter though, because once it started, it's got a life of its own.
Right.
You just have to extinguish the habit. Anyway, so people that struggled with chocolate tended to be a little bit lonely or brokenhearted or depressed. That's what they were feeling stressed about. People that struggled with crunchy, salty things, they tended to be more stressed at work. And people that struggled with soft, chewy, starchy things, they tended to be more stressed at home. And I actually figured that was going to be the beginning of a very interesting solution. But before I was going to teach about it or anything, I called my mom. And I grew up in a family of 17 psychotherapists and psychologists. Yeah.
Okay.
When something breaks in the house, we all ask it how it feels and nobody knows how to fix it. So I called my mom and I said, Mom, I'm not so happy in the marriage and I'm a little lonely and brokenhearted. So it kind of makes sense. But how did I learn to go to that? How did I learn to run to chocolate when I feel lonely and brokenhearted in the first place? Right. And she gets this horrible look on her face and she says, honey, I'm so sorry. And I said, Mom, it doesn't matter. This was 20 years ago already, but Mom, it doesn't matter. We're talking about something that was decades ago. I forgive you. I love you. I just want to figure this out. She says, well, I'm so sorry. But when you were 1 year old in 1965, your father was a captain in the Army and they were talking about sending him to Vietnam. And I was terrified I'm going to be an Army widow with 2 little kids. At the same time, your grandfather, my father, had just gotten out of prison. And I had no idea where he was for a couple of years. I had no idea he was guilty, but he was doing awful things. And I was devastated. So between worrying about your dad and worrying about my father, I just really was sitting and staring at the wall most of the time, feeling anxious and depressed. My cat it's a new sofa. He's messing with the sofa.
Beautiful cat.
Thank you. He thinks so too. So she said, I was just sitting and staring at the wall. And I didn't have it in me to love you and cuddle you and play with you when you came running to me and crying. So I kept a big bottle of chocolate Bosco syrup in a refrigerator on the floor. And I'd say, go get your Bosco, Glenn. And you go running over to the Bosco or crawling over to the Bosco. And you'd open up the bottle and you'd suck on the cap and you go into a chocolate sugar coma. And I could resume staring at the wall. She said, I'm so sorry, honey. And, the thing about it, Matt, is that if this were a movie, we would have had a big hug and a big cry. And then I'd never have trouble with chocolate again, right?
Right. You found the problem, so it's fixed.
It's all gone, right?
Right.
What actually happened, it was over Skype, and we had a metaphorical hug and a cry, and it was a good conversation. I became more compassionate towards myself. I did notice that some of that self-hatred. By the way, I used to be almost 300 pounds, and so I was having all kinds of problems myself. But I softened towards my mother. I learned a lot about her, but I actually started eating more chocolate at that point. And it's because there was this voice of justification inside me that I wasn't aware of. And it said something like, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. We definitely have a chocolate-sized hole in our heart because our mama didn't love us enough. Let's go get some more chocolate right now. Yippee. It was like the perfect excuse.
Right.
And at that point, combined with having worked for the food industry and seeing all the hyperpalatable concentrated forms of sugar and starch and oil and salt and excitotoxins that they're engineering, spending millions of dollars to engineer, which tries to hit the bliss point.
I was just going to say bliss point studies, right? They're working against us. Highest paid psychologists in the world are working against us.
And physicists and, chemical
Chemists.
Engineers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. How do we hit the bliss point in the reptilian brain without giving them enough nutrition to feel satisfied?
Right, exactly. So they keep going.
And every time you're looking for love at the bottom of a bag or a box or a container, there's some fat cat in a white suit with a mustache laughing all the way to the bank, right?
Exactly.
Right. So I'd seen that, and I'd seen the advertising industry trying to convince people that this stuff was good for you, that this is what you needed. And they were very good at it. People think advertising doesn't affect them, but it affects you more when you think that because your sales resistance is down. So they were very good at that. And I said, these are very external forces. This has nothing to do with my personal psychology. This has nothing to do with the fact that my mama didn't love me enough, or she dropped me on my head, or her mother dropped her on her head. It doesn't matter. These are evolutionary buttons in the primitive brain, which knows nothing about love, by the way. The primitive brain, if this is the brainstem, it looks at something in the environment and it says, do I eat it? Do I mate with it? Or do I kill it? It's like a bad college drinking game, right?
Yeah.
No, that's
the reptilian brain.
It's the reptilian brain. Feast or famine, fight or flight, mate or ignore. Very primitive impulses that keep us alive. And thank God they do. But it's the mammalian brain on top of that says, before you eat, mate, or kill that thing, what impact will that have on your loved ones? What impact will that have on your tribe? And then it's the neocortex on top of that says, before you eat, mate, or kill that thing, what impact does that have on your long-term goals and your fitness and your health and your, your spirituality and your music and your art and your dreams, for all that matter? And so the weird thing was, I'd been spending about 20 years trying to take a depth psychology approach. I thought if I could fill the hole in my heart, then I wouldn't have to fill the hole in my...
You'd feel the craving. You'd cure the craving.
Exactly. I'm sorry, I get a little excitable. Please feel free.
No, I'm following along. Yeah, I just want to...
So that actually caused me to switch paradigms. And I no longer, like, if the emotion was the fire, I was no longer trying to find the source of the fire or put out the fire. I said, I just want to build a good fireplace, because maybe it's this voice of justification that's poking holes in the fireplace that's creating the problem in the first place. If I could just build a better fireplace that insulated me and would sever the link between emotional conflict and overeating, rather than solve the emotional conflict, which could take decades.
Yeah, a lifetime.
If ever, right? I mean, I still have some scars from what I went through as a kid. So I did something a little crazy at that time.
So real quick though, are you talking, so with the fire, just for listeners following along, would the fire technically be a self-love that you would have to kind of harness, theoretically speaking?
The fire would be, in this metaphor, the fire would be the emotional pain that I was feeling, the loneliness or the depression, or for some people it's anxiety.
Oh, so that's why you're saying if you build a better insulation around that pain, then you can prevent it from controlling your bad behaviors.
Right. I mean, As a psychologist, I would tell you that it's important not to ignore the pain and to, find someone to talk to about it and work your way through that. But as a behavioral coach who's trying to help you to stop overeating, I would say that's a job separate and apart from extinguishing the behavior. What we want to do is figure out, how do we wake up at the moment of impulse so that we
Okay.
don't, right? That's what I meant. And a fireplace would be
Huh.
something that really protected you from that and made sure that you were awake when an ash was trying to
When
break
that,
through.
gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So can I tell you a crazy story if I haven't already?
Yes, please do.
Okay. So this is my first foray out of the love yourself thin model. For 20 years, I would get a little thinner and a lot fatter every time I went to see a new psychologist or psychiatrist or Readers Anonymous or any of the myriad of things you can do to try to psychologically heal yourself when you have a eating problem. This was my first foray out of that, and it was very internal. I'm giving you this long preface because it's a little embarrassing
Mm.
for a sophisticated psychologist like me that this is what actually worked. Okay, so I decided I was going to have very clear lines in the sand if I was going to know when my reptilian brain was active. So I'm going to have to be the alpha wolf of my own mind. I'm going to have to take a tough love approach. No more of this loving myself thin. I'm going to have to know when this thing is waking up so I can do something about it. So I made a really clear line and I said, I will never have chocolate on a weekday again. I'll only ever have it on a Saturday after I worked out. And then if I happened to be at Starbucks and there was a big hairy chocolate bar at the counter calling my name, and I heard a voice in my head on a Wednesday saying, you know what, Glenn, you worked out really hard. You're not going to gain any weight if you have a couple of bites. A couple ounces is not going to kill you. You could just start your silly diet again tomorrow. It'll be just as easy. I would go, whoa, who's in charge here? I decided to call that thing that was trying to take charge my inner pig. I wish I used something else. I would, because
Yeah.
I took a lot of heat for doing this. I've got millions of readers now, and
Yeah.
I wish I used something else, but I didn't. I called it my inner pig. I would say chocolate on a weekday is pig slop. I'd say, wait a minute, that's not me. That's my inner pig. My pig is squealing for pig slop. I don't eat pig slop. I don't let farm animals tell me what to do.
Yeah.
And as ridiculous and crude as that sounds, it was the first thing that really would wake me up at the moment of impulse and give me a chance to get back into my right mind again.
It's the dividing line, right? Yeah. It's distinguishing between the voices, and I think it's so impactful, and it does have to be something kind of profound and sticks out. And I understand that there are people that get sensitive to that terminology, but if you want to make an omelet, you got to break some eggs.
It was valuable that it was something that disgusted me a little bit.
Right.
And
Right.
because at that moment of impulse, see, the reptilian brain has the ability to push our rational self out of the way if it perceives there to be enough of an emergency. And we'll get into that. There are all sorts of reasons why today's reptilian brain does perceive there to be false emergencies. So that would kind of pry apart the automatic loop, the automatic habit loop that I would have before, where I would just see the chocolate bar, think it was a good idea to do it, and then I would be eating it before I even knew what was happening. There was a space between stimulus and response. Sometimes I'd make the right choice, sometimes I wouldn't. But the point is that I had the opportunity to do it.
Right.
It was
Right.
the first
And
time
that's just about repetition to then, professionals practice something until they get it right, or until they don't get it wrong, excuse me.
Yeah. And there was a variety of things you could do with that space. One of them was you could just take a deep breath, because if what's causing the urge is a false perception of emergency, could be because you're undernourished or overtired or overworked that day, then your sympathetic nervous system has become active. That's the system that says we have to do something urgently to fix this. What you want to do is try to move to your parasympathetic nervous system, and sometimes just taking a breath was all that it was necessary.
To relax.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Especially if you breathe out for longer than you breathe in. We call them 7-11 breaths for my friend Laurie Hammond.
Mm.
If you breathe out for longer than you breathe in, breathe out for a count of 11 after breathing in for a count of 7, you're telling the brain that everything is okay right now. Because if it wasn't, if you were running from an actual hungry bear, you'd be going. So when you breathe in and then you breathe out for a longer time, you move out of that emergency state into more of a state of resting and digesting, and you activate what we call the parasympathetic nervous system.
Mm.
Once I had more of a space between stimulus and response, I would examine what my pig was saying in particular, because I said, now, wait a minute, maybe this is not true what it's saying, because I don't really get the results that I want, so there must be something wrong with what it's saying. And if it would say, for example, you can just start your silly rule again tomorrow, it'll be just as easy, I could step back and take a look at that and say, you know what, that's not really true.
Yeah.
The way the brain works is something called neuroplasticity, which says that what fires together wires together. So if you have a craving for chocolate and you have the thought, just start tomorrow, and then you have chocolate, you will have reinforced the craving and made the craving stronger tomorrow. You'll also have reinforced the thought, just start tomorrow, and you'll be more likely to think, just start tomorrow. So you can only ever use the present moment to be healthy, and if you're in a hole, you better stop digging.
I love that.
So I would call that a cognitive refutation, essentially fixing your thinking about food, removing the justification. I would find that would calm me down also, because, I'm someone who really likes to see himself as being able to follow through and being a man of my word. And so if I didn't have the justification, it became psychologically uncomfortable to go forward with the behavior.
Yeah.
I did that for about 8 years personally. I didn't teach this. I just kind of recovered myself.
Right.
I would look at all the things that the pig would say, and I would fix them. That's how I recovered. In retrospect, there's some other things that I would do, like I wouldn't just say, well, you have to use the present moment to be healthy. I would ask myself what else I might genuinely need. Often I would need some type of a green smoothie for a little bit of energy at that time. So it turned out there was some authentic nutritional need that had been
your body was craving for. Yeah.
Sometimes it might just be that I needed a little personal contact or I needed a break.
Mm-hmm.
But then after keeping a journal for 8 years with everything imaginable that the pig could say to try to convince me to break my rules, and playing with different types of rules, some things which got me to totally give up things, other things which would, make sure I'd always have water in the morning, and realizing
it wasn't just focused around chocolate. It was focused around all of the maladaptive behaviors that you were trying to rid yourself of.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, and I did discover you can't have too many rules at once.
Yeah. The opposite of pleasure is rigidity.
Yes, exactly. But hard and fast rules do work better than guidelines.
They say fair. Oh, okay.
But for example, it's very common advice in our culture for people to say, just eat healthy 90% of the time and indulge yourself 10% of the time. That's good advice in theory, and it would be a good behavior to engage in, except there's no counsel there regarding what's the 10% and what's the 90%.
Gotcha.
So you have to constantly make decisions. Yeah.
Right.
Willpower is the ability to make good decisions, and there's only so many good decisions you can make on a given day. So
real quick, so just to back up, over this 8 years of this studying and this stuff, was this your personal weight loss transformation? Was this when you were like 300 pounds and down to whatever you're at? Okay.
Yeah. I don't know for sure that I was 300 pounds, by the way. I stopped weighing myself at about 257, but I kept eating and kept getting fatter. So I'm just guessing that's about where it was.
Yeah.
But that was my personal journey.
And then in those 8 years, is that where you're at your same weight now after that 8 year transformation?
It's not the same weight because I took up some muscle building activities.
Okay. Yeah.
So I hover around 15% body fat.
Well, that's excellent.
Yeah, it's not bad. It's not bad.
That's great.
I might push it down to 12 soon, but I've been as low as 9, and I find it very hard to sustain. So,
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But that's great that you're able to get the weight off and keep it off, because I think that's usually people's biggest struggle is, right, they can lose weight, but can they keep it off? That's always the big question.
well, the trick to that was understanding that character trumps willpower.
Yeah.
So these rules are kind of a temporary tool. So if I ask people, do you think you could never have chocolate during the week again? They usually freak out if chocolate is their thing. It could be potato chips or pizza or whatever. And I said, if I change the way that I phrase that question and I say, could you become someone who doesn't eat chocolate during the week? They'll go, yeah, I could do that. Now, it's kind of interesting because it does sound more appealing to just become someone that doesn't eat chocolate during the week, as opposed to feeling like you're under the camera of,
Constraints.
yeah,
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 right.
like this Nazi food policeman in your head.
Interesting.
You will not have chocolate during the week.
But you
Um,
make it about the character and not about the willpower that they're going to need to foresee to have to control themselves.
because one definition of character is what we habitually do at the moment of temptation. For example, if you walk into a diner and the waitress goes to get the menus and there's $15 on the table for her tip and she hasn't seen it, do you take that $15 if nobody would see you?
Right. That's the definition of character.
I'm guessing you wouldn't do that
Oh,
because
I would not.
you're not a thief, right?
Correct.
Does it require willpower to not take that $15?
I mean, if I'm someone who doesn't have any money or a job and I'm trying to feed a child, it
Maybe,
might. It might, right.
maybe, but for the
me,
average person who's not,
yeah, it's a character thing for sure.
you don't really have to think about it because the brain is set up to automate that type of decision.
Hmm.
And so what you really want to do is create rules which you just eventually become part of your personality. So I don't actually have a rule that says I don't have chocolate anymore. I just became someone who doesn't do it. And I don't remember even exactly when I let go of the rule. It just became an easy thing.
Yeah.
I didn't have it at all for a while. You don't have to do this to follow my system, by the way. You can eat any diet that you want to. But for me, I evolved to not have chocolate at all. And I didn't do it for a long time. I had it on my plan for maybe a year or two. And then I just didn't have it on the plan anymore because I became someone who doesn't have chocolate. So
Yeah. So
yeah.
was there a point where you recognized, I've completed this rule successfully, I've built it into the character of who I've become, and now it's time for a next progression?
Yeah.
That kind of comes naturally. You kind of start to learn through the succession of your successes, your successful decision making, that okay, I've solidified this now. This is no longer, the pig doesn't have a control over me. I have a control over the pig.
Yeah. If you look at the literature on behavior extinction, these cravings are attached to very particular stimuli. So let's say that you're craving pizza. That could be attached to passing the pizza place on the way home from work. It could also be attached to a poker game with the boys once a month. And you decide that I'm no longer going to stop at the pizza place on the way home. It turns out after about 28 exposures to the pizza place, it's not a straight line down. We'll talk about why in a little bit if you want to. But after about 28 exposures, you're not going to be craving pizza when you pass that pizza place anymore.
28 exposures?
Somewhere between 21 and 30. What actually happens is there's a little honeymoon period, and then your brain goes crazy. I call it the where the F is my pizza reaction because it's used to getting pizza when it passes the pizza place. So it seems like it's going to be easy for a little bit, and then holy crap, this is hard. I can't do it. But then you push through that, and then it kind of goes straight down with a couple of little tries at the end, and then it's mostly labeled dormant. That craving is not erased. That stimulus is not erased because the brain is a calorie acquisition machine. In primitive times, it was necessary to store and learn all the different ways to get calories. So your brain will forever remember that craving at the pizza place if you activate it again, but it won't bother you after about 30 days. It'll become much, much easier.
So you coach your clients and your audience to work on one behavior every 30 days?
Usually no more than one thing of significance every 30 days. Yeah. And
That's fascinating.
sometimes longer.
Yeah,
We,
yeah.
we will, I feel like I'm over talking. Am I stopping you from saying
No,
something?
not at all. I love all this stuff. I think it's super important for people to understand that it's not all about willpower to control their cravings, and it's not about finding the most extreme diet. I think this is the type of stuff that people need to hear because everyone wants the quick fix, and 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 it's funny. It's like what came first, the chicken or the egg? What came first, the person who wants the quick fix or the quick fix peddler? And I think that information gets out there to people much more rapidly than the meat and the potatoes. This type of information, which is, hits home to what we're about here at Think Fitness Life. Like it's all about the mindset first, and we as human beings are able to access that higher level of thinking where we can actually change the way we think. So we need to exercise that. We're not farm animals, like you said. We need to exercise that gift and use it to our advantage. And this is the way to do it, by sort of hacking our reptilian brain in a way, because it's working against us in today's modern
In the modern
stimulus.
food environment. Yeah.
Right, right.
You do want to start slowly. I usually ask people to start with one simple rule. So they go to kindergarten before they go to college.
Hmm.
Most people, they live a life like this old poem by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. It goes
Okay.
something like this: when she was good, she was very, very good, but when she was bad, she was horrid. That's how most people eat. They go in these diets and they try to rein everything in and lose a lot of weight quickly, and then they can't take it anymore, and they just go screw it, and they're just binge, 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 to varying degrees.
It's like all this all or nothing behavior.
And so we have to break that. So as long as there's nothing urgent that requires you to lose a lot of weight quickly from your doctor, we say what's something that you could and would do that would make a big difference and point you in the right direction, give you a lot of confidence, but it wouldn't be too onerous.
Hmm.
And we ask people to take a couple of breaths, and we hear things back like, remember this truck driver who said, I've got to eat at fast food stops 3 times a day. So I can't stop doing that, but I'll tell you what, I won't go back for seconds. And with that one simple rule, he began a feeling like he was in control and not this cravings
Mm.
force inside of him. It
Yeah,
makes all the difference in the world.
for sure.
There are times when you have your mojo and times when you don't. When you pick something simple and you set a low bar to start with, you can execute the rule even if you don't have your mojo and you feel like you're in a foul mood and you just don't want to.
Yeah.
That's critically important because it drives consistency.
Mm.
When you observe yourself doing something consistently, you start to say, maybe I'm just not someone who goes back for seconds. Your
Yeah.
identity function kicks in, and then we get back to character trumping willpower.
We've adapted our character.
Yeah.
And I think something valuable that comes with that approach is recognizing the back to that the plasticity of the ability to adapt and change. I think so many people attach themselves to it's so much of it is their identity, right? Like I have anger or I have this eating disorder, and it's like, well, it's not like you have it, you don't own it, it's not all about you, it's something that's a
Yeah.
part of you, but it doesn't limit you, and you can own it versus it owning you. And
That's
I'm someone who has ulcerative colitis, so speaking of heightened like hyperexcitability and heightened levels of stress from stimuli that shouldn't induce that, it took me a while to kind of separate my anger and stress side from who I am as a person and recognize that and almost look at it outside of my body as a part of an experience that my body's experiencing, but not who my identity is or my character is.
it's really, really important what you're saying. People have come to believe that cravings are like a disease and they're powerless over them.
Yeah.
Like it's a sickness. And as a consequence, they look for treatment. Now, here I'm not speaking as a doctor and a psychologist. I'm speaking as an educator and a coach who has some opinions that are different than maybe my profession has.
Yeah.
Strong cravings are not a sign of a sick mind. They're actually a sign of a healthy mind doing its job, but that healthy energy has been perverted in the modern food environment. 100,000 years ago, if you didn't have strong cravings, you would have died off. Strong cravings were a survival advantage because the food environment was probably not nearly as abundant as it is now.
Right.
So when you found signals in the environment that suggested that food was available, you had to really mobilize. You had to be really motivated to go after those food signals and find it. If a hypothetical caveman named Thag, Thag, saw a monkey that led him to a banana tree, it behooved him to develop very strong cravings when he saw a monkey because he needed to follow that monkey to the next banana tree, right?
Yeah.
So cravings are not a sign of a sick mind. They're a sign of a healthy mind doing its job. Also, the very same mechanism which forms craving, which has to do with dopamine levels and the response of the pleasure system,
Yeah.
that very same mechanism is responsible for extinguishing cravings.
Okay.
So
interesting.
what that means is if you can form a craving, you can also extinguish it.
Just as easily get rid of it. Right.
Yeah. So the fact that you have the craving is a sign that things are functioning well. That means that you have the capacity to get rid of it. Whereas what people conclude in today's environment is that I've got these strong cravings. There's something wrong with me. I'm not like normal people. I can't control myself.
And how do you identify someone who may still want to self-sabotage and still, somewhat like a learned helplessness, want to say they have these cravings to justify their behaviors? Kind of like what you said before, when you first identified that your mom had created this chocolate craving into you, you're like, oh, well, let's go to the chocolate store then.
It's a really good question. We insist on the autonomous choice of food rules. People will often come to see us wanting to be good for a little while. Come on, Dr. Glenn, tell me how I should eat, and I'll be good for a little while, right?
Right.
Because I'm good at looking good for a while, but really, I just want to keep doing this.
Right.
And I'm like, no, I'm not playing that game. I'm not falling for that trap. As an adult, and I only work with adults at this point. As an adult, you've been around long enough, you've tried enough diets, you've read enough about nutrition. You've had good days and bad days. You know what a good day looks like for you. What's one simple rule that you wouldn't find too onerous that you could and would do? And then I find that if people pick those rules themselves, then we define the voice in your head that suggests that you break the rule as your inner food monster or your inner saboteur or whatever you want to call it. And so is there a voice that says, you really want to eat this chocolate and you know it? Of course it is. But the way we play this game, we've defined that as the pig. So we've set up a situation where we can start to separate from that voice. So we do have these voices of inner sabotage. And could some of those voices come from, being taught to be masochistic as a kid, or not really having had a constructive outlet for your anger, or not having enough training in verbalization and, nonviolent communication or something like that? It's yes, it's all possible.
Right.
But I find that you don't really have to get into all that. You just have to teach people to separate from that voice and then engage in this series of behaviors. Because ultimately, we also talk about motivation. I'll say, well, why do you want to follow this one simple rule? If you didn't go back for seconds, Mr. Truck Driver, for a whole year, even though your pig says that's impossible and you really want to go back for seconds, what if you didn't? What would life be like? And paint me a picture of your day, not just your weight, which will probably be better, but what about your digestion? What about your skin tone? What about your
energy levels? Right.
Exactly. And so we really try to amp up the motivation and connect it to the rule itself.
So that their brain starts to switch over to creating that desire to, this is the character we want to portray and be.
There's more pleasure to be had.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. So you have to really kind of walk people through it because their brain hasn't. It's fascinating because you'd think that naturally the brain would have already got there. Naturally the brain would have already got there and said, well, if we just stop this, we'll probably have more energy. We'll probably feel better. We'll probably look better. We might attract a mate. And it's interesting that
the rational brain would do that. But what if the reptilian brain thinks you're going to die if you don't keep binging?
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So
was that what we were talking about earlier when you said we'll dive into some of the reasons why the reptilian brain is making bad decisions now? Is this because one of the things that I've done some research on is the amount of decisions we have to make. We make about 60,000 decisions a day. Or I think it's 30,000 decisions a day. And we process 60,000 pieces of information in a day. And historically speaking, Fag walking through the forest, he didn't have to make that many decisions. His nervous system was and the stimuli were very lowered. So it was a much more slower pace for decision making. And now we get such a rapid fire intake that we can make these misconstrued interpretations and poor thin slicing.
Exactly. Yeah. No, and look at the number of scenes per minute in your standard situation comedy today as opposed to 30 years ago. Look at the amount of naked women and explosions and car chases on television, on the internet. Look at the amount of decisions we have to make via email, social media. Do I like it? Now it's not enough to like it or not like it. There are,
there's 5 other emojis you can pick from. Right. You can save it. You can share it. Right.
But you're burning a little brain glucose every time that you're doing that. Yeah. Right. And there are studies that show that it's not just food decisions that wear down your willpower about food. Any decisions will wear down your willpower about food. They have studies where they get people to do math problems, and then they find that they have a harder time resisting marshmallows as compared to people who didn't, because they had to decide on the right answer and they had to burn all that brain glucose.
And their brain says, we're hungry, we need quick glucose.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
But it's not just decision making.
Yeah.
The screw it, just do it response. That's the colloquial experience of what we'd call organismic distress, where the brain perceives there to be a false emergency and goes after resources at all costs, caloric resources at all costs. We experience that as screw it, just do it. Yes, I know this is bad thinking. Yes, I know, I might even know why it's bad thinking, but oh well, what the hell? I'll just start again tomorrow.
Do it. Yeah, right. Because there's a level to which the craving is a little bit justified, right? Like we talked a little bit about, there might be a nutrient resource that the body is used to getting from that craving. So it's wanting that, whether it be something starchy or something crunchy or chocolatey. Maybe it's metals that a body can be craving.
Or magnesium, yeah.
Right. But when does it, like alcohol, there's no real nutritious value to alcohol or drugs, but now that's another pig sort of decision-making process sometimes. But what's the fine line between addiction versus a craving?
Well, you're talking about a biological error.
Okay.
When for example, I remember working with a food bar manufacturer who had a very addictive food bar. And they made it more addictive by taking the vitamins out of the bar, and because that made it taste better, and putting the money into multicolored, diverse packaging instead.
Okay. So appealing to the eyes.
Well, in nature, this is where they say eat the rainbow. If you see blueberries and green lettuce and red tomatoes and yellow carrots, and you get them all together, you're getting a variety of micronutrients. So we have a variety response. It's an evolutionary button that says, look for that kind of variety and keep eating when you see it. However, these food bar manufacturers, who are not alone, this goes on all across the industry, have faked you out. They've faked out your survival drive. They've actually hijacked your survival drive for their purposes. You're not actually getting the nutrition. Then that can become an addictive behavior because your survival drive becomes more active and says, I didn't get what I need, but it seems like this stuff should have, so maybe I should have more. So you kind of have to pry yourself apart from that and force yourself to have a green smoothie, or sometimes I'll tell people, if there's no medical reason they can't do it, to put a half pound of lettuce in a, with a cup of water and blend it all up and drink it down like medicine.
I do that. I do that every day. That's how I get my spinach in.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
But it's particularly helpful if you just ate some industrial food, like you have a whole bag of potato chips or a box of Oreos or something.
Oh, interesting.
It's particularly helpful to go back and do that, because you're telling your survival drive, look, there is good stuff available. You don't have to keep craving the Oreos, because when you have that box of Oreos, your brain is going to want more. Your brain's good, because it's all set up to get you to want more. And so it kind of recorrects and shows the brain where the good stuff is for real.
Yeah.
I forgot the question you asked to get us there.
Well, my recent one that I fell into was we had a little candy by the door to give out for Halloween, and I usually never have, the bad sugar, quote unquote, or even just like candy in general. Like, I'm more likely to have a piece of fruit or a smoothie, to your point. Like, I throw spinach, banana, coconut milk, and sometimes a scoop of like a chocolate protein, and it tastes delicious. It covers all my bases there. But it's something about justifying, like, oh, I never have candy. It's just one. It's Snickers. It's my favorite. It's a little fun-sized bar. It's only this big. And through the span of walking up and down the stairs and passing out candy throughout the night, I probably had 10 little pieces. And, the next day I felt crummy. My digestive system had some issues with the colitis. And I just kind of laughed at myself, like, gosh, I can't believe I succumbed to those bliss point psychologists. but yeah.
I would have had you freeze some bananas, blend them all up to make a type of banana ice cream, eat a little bit extra before all the candy people started coming.
To kind of beat the craving ahead of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just funny because, like, I would have thought, oh, I've beaten all these childhood addictions. I don't eat candy, but then it was in front of me, and something where it's easier out of sight, out of mind, but it's much harder. It takes a little bit more careful understanding of yourself when it's around and you have to make better choices.
Oh, because cravings are attached to particular stimuli. Yeah. So in your day-to-day life, you've extinguished those cravings, but you haven't extinguished, being inundated by Halloween candy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, we'll try again next year. But back to my question was just the difference between a craving for like chocolate or chips or Swedish fish and like an addiction to, say, alcohol. Because one thing that we were talking about earlier when you said asking someone to think about, oh, can you stop yourself from eating chocolate 5 days in a row, or can you be the person that only eats chocolate on the weekend? Like, making that distinction in the character. And I find that it's easier coaching and working with people to talk about food. And the moment that I'm like, we want to cut drinking back, it's like I'm asking them to give up their baby.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I don't believe that addiction is a disease.
Okay.
I take issue with.
I'm sure you get controversial replies for that. Yeah.
I think addiction is a choice. Yeah. I think it feels like a disease. I believe that people feel powerless. I think that the brain is so interested in automating pleasure that it feels like you're trying to stop a locomotive in its tracks at first.
Right.
And try to intervene with that. So I have empathy and sympathy for what people go through when they try to alter these behaviors.
For sure.
I think it's very dangerous to say that you're powerless over it. I think it's very dangerous to say that you can't help yourself. It's a devil made me do it approach to the world where you're abdicating your free will and responsibility. The reason that's so popular is because it eliminates any sense of shame or guilt. Well, I have a disease, I can't help myself.
Right. I can't control it. It's not me. No, but isn't it also, wouldn't you agree that it's also unhealthy to have the all or nothing mentality? To be like, oh, well, I drank and I made some bad choices, so I need to just go cold turkey and never touch the drink again. And
the psychology of perfectionism is very interesting, because what your pig would have you do is give up perfectionism entirely so that you just try and do the best you can. right? But doing the best you can, progress, not perfection, when you're aiming at a goal is a formula when it comes to toxic pleasure like alcohol or chocolate. It's really just saying, I'm going to try for a little while until I don't feel like it anymore.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Right?
It's exactly what it is. But no, everyone's too afraid to say that.
So let's look at what the psychology of winners is. When an Olympic archer aims at the bullseye, first of all, Olympic archers only hit the bullseye 30 to 40% of the time.
Yeah.
So when you miss, it's appropriate to say progress, not perfection, to look at by how much did you miss the bullseye and in what direction, so that you can make corrections to your aim next time. It's also important, by the way, to have a very specific bullseye with a very specific boundary, so you get that critical feedback by how much did I miss and in what direction and what corrections should I make.
It's like the scientific method to control the variables and still right.
But then when the archer is aiming for the bullseye, they have to feel at one with the bullseye. To have the best chance of hitting it, they have to purge their mind of all the doubt and insecurity and actually see the arrow going into the bullseye before they let go. They commit with perfection, but they forgive themselves with dignity. The pig does the opposite. The pig would have you try the best you can, progress, not perfection, as you're aiming at the goal. But then if you miss the target, it would say, well, if you're not perfect, then you're nothing. You might as well just shoot all the rest of the arrows up into the air. Right?
Yeah, right.
So this is one of my unique contributions, I think, is that we're not supposed to give up perfectionism entirely. There is an energy in perfectionism that we can leverage when we separate ourselves from the pig.
Yeah.
When we recognize that there are two distinct environments in which we can apply it. There's the aiming environment and there's the analysis of mistakes environment. In the aiming environment, we do need to commit with perfection. Otherwise, doubt and insecurity wears you down.
We'll already weigh on it and we're going to miss anyway. Right?
We're going to miss anyway, yeah.
And you'll start to believe that you'll miss all the time. And you'll start to truncate your own performance.
Yep. But then if you do miss, that's when you have to
forgive with dignity.
You need to feel a little bit of guilt or a little bit of pain. It's like if you touch a hot stove.
We don't want that we don't want to have a pain blocker so you don't feel the hot stove. We want you to feel the pain of the hot stove, right?
Because that's the only way you're going to learn.
But we don't want you to feel shamed for it all day long, right?
You're not going to say, I'm a pathetic hot stove toucher. I might as well just put my whole hand down on the stove. Right. So commit with perfection, but forgive yourself with dignity turns out to be the winning strategy.
I love that. Did you coin that phrase?
Yeah.
I love that. That's great. Yeah. I'm a big quote person, so that really, because I believe in, the ease to understanding. Like you talk about the importance of consistency and the importance of compliancy. And I think when we can have little aphorisms such as that one, it's easy to keep with us in our toolbox in those tight situations.
That was a pivotal mantra for me. When I figured that out, I was much better able to recover from mistakes and get the most out of them. Another one is turning guilt into responsibility. Like there's no purpose to perseverating on the guilt. It just makes you feel too weak to resist the next binge. There is a purpose to letting the guilt wake you up to a painful experience so that you can make adjustments and not make it happen again. So you look very carefully and you say, what can I learn? Is there a problem with my rule? Did I not feed myself well enough? Was I too fatigued? What am I going to do differently next time so this doesn't happen?
And there's a level to which toxic positivity can be detrimental to the individual in those scenarios. And that's what I think has been brought to society's attention through the show Ted Lasso. No one really talked about toxic positivity until that show. And I loved it because I think one of the things that started in this direction, unfortunately, was things like participation trophies, because you overvalued just effort and you undervalued those who put the hard work in and discipline in to get consistent and get good and win. So you diminished the pain. I'm not saying pain like I want people to hurt, but the sting of a loss, which then translates into purpose or motivation to drive you towards more adaptive behaviors versus continued maladaptive.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
So where else do you see, because you've been diving into this research for a long time, where else did you see the start of this transition in the downward position, with more damage to society, and where have you seen more of the upswing in the corrections of this?
I don't know that I've seen a lot of corrections, unfortunately. I guess you could say the organic movement
Yeah,
and the
like a grassroots movement.
yeah, but the knowledge that, like, if you can get away from the arguments about carnivore versus vegetarian or point counting or calorie counting, and you could just, if people would eat less junk, if they'd have less processed food and eat more whole foods, I think there's a burgeoning awareness growing that people do better with whole foods. I actually don't think we'd have things called eating disorders 100,000 years ago.
Yeah.
I don't think Fag sat around holding his stomach and say, "Oi, ate too much mammoth."
Yeah.
I think that, or that he thought he looked too fat or anything like that. I think it's a byproduct of all the concoctions that are available. Lewis Black said he thought the end of the world was here when he walked out of a Starbucks and across the street he saw another Starbucks. And I think you can do that with any fast food place now. There are places in most metropolises where you can walk out of a convenience store where there are hundreds of thousands of calories available for very little effort and little money. And right across the street is another one. And I think that's cycling down. I think that the science of cravings is mostly in the hands of the manufacturers, not so much in the hands of the consumer.
Yeah.
And so they're getting better and better at pressing these buttons, and just like the obesity epidemic or the diabetes epidemic, there is a solution. It requires a little bit of work and thinking.
Yeah, we have to do the work. We can't rely on the system to fix it, right?
Yeah. If you don't have a plan, then you're part of someone else's.
Oh, I like that.
That's not my quote. I forgot who said that. But I'll tell you, Henry Ford said that thinking is the hardest work that there is, and that's why hardly anybody does it.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. And I think that's why it's just so valuable to give people all the tools at their disposal. And I think the more people talk about this stuff and become aware of this stuff, the more that they get back in the driver's seat. And I think that's why it is important to make a clear distinction of saying something like, you don't have a disease, you have a reptilian brain working against your prefrontal cortex from the person that you want to become. And you have to learn to identify the adaptive behaviors that's going to help you achieve those things in your life, and identify the maladaptive ones, and do your best to
you have a healthy survival drive that's been hijacked by industry.
Yes, exactly. That's a nice way of putting it.
Thought about it for a long time.
You don't say.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about where to go to find your stuff. You just came out with a book recently. Where to go to find?
Yeah, I've updated everything in the latest book with all the scientists of cravings, and also the earlier books were more focused on fixing your thinking, and this book is kind of about fixing the whole thing. So I much prefer people read the later book. It's called Defeat Your Cravings at defeatyourcravings.com. And if you click the big blue button when you get to defeatyourcravings.com and sign up for the reader bonus list, you'll get a free copy of the book in Kindle, Nook, or PDF format. We also have traditional formats, but there's a charge for that. More importantly, I know that there's an awful lot of information here, and it probably sounds a little weird, like, why does Matt have a doctor on with a pig inside of him? It might sound harsh in theory, but in practice, when we're actually coaching people, it's a very compassionate, life-giving, confidence-producing technique. And I can actually take people from feeling despairing into feeling very hopeful within just one session. So I recorded a whole bunch of them, and I give those away for free as well.
Oh, that's excellent.
As well as a set of food plan starter templates for a variety of dietary philosophies: point counting, calorie counting, whole foods, ketogenic, whatever you're doing. As long as you're willing to regularly nutrify yourself, we could help you. So it's all at defeatyourcravings.com. Click the big blue button.
I love it. You're doing the good work. You're fighting the good fight. There's definitely a pharmaceutical agricultural complex out there, and you're going against big pharma, big agro, and it's not easy.
I was on the wrong side of the war in my 30s. No, I was. I mean, I work for big food and big pharma.
Oh, you're saying you were on the other. Gotcha.
I was on the
Gotcha.
other. I'm like the Marlboro man late in his life. I feel contrite and
But you didn't know. You didn't know any better. And
yeah.
back then we were talking about solving world hunger. And look what we did. We got GMOs. We developed herbicides, pesticides. We helped with yields. But we unfortunately used tape to fix a bigger problem, and we robbed Paul to pay Peter, and we did more damage than good to our food system and the food supply and just the natural progression of systems through the years. The pests and the problems in the soil were supposed to make the product, the fruit or the vegetable, stronger over time. If they don't have any stress to grow, then they're not strong themselves.
Oh, that's interesting. I never thought of it like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Matt, when you and I are running the world, things will be different.
Yeah, I look forward to it.
Yeah.
Dr. Glenn Livingston, thank you so much for your time. Two last questions I like to ask all my guests is, one, favorite thing you like to do for exercise, and two, a favorite quote.
I do hot power yoga, vinyasa yoga 5 times a week.
Love it.
I also do aerobics and things like that. Can I give you 2 quotes?
Yes.
Jim Rohn said, "A life of discipline is better than a life of regret." And Peter McWilliams said, "You can have anything you want, but you can't have everything you want," which both kind of congeal on a life philosophy of adding more disciplines and understanding that your freedom is expanded by adding disciplines and deciding what you're going to focus on. And it's worked out really well for me. I hope it works out well for you too.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much again. I really loved all your perspectives, all your quotes. Dr. Glenn Livingston, everybody, if you're looking for his stuff, again, go to defeatyourcravings.com, and we'll catch you guys next time.
Thanks, man.
If you're ready to make steps towards improving your health or increasing your performance, book a free 30-minute call today by visiting thinkfitnesslife.com.